My name is Hilda. I'm 67 years old, and the day I lay on a hospital gurney to donate my kidney to my own son, I thought I was saving a life, but I didn't know it. Someone very close to me was hiding the truth. Have you ever felt like you did everything right, and yet was something wrong? That the silence of certain people weighs more than any scream? Well, that's how it all started. I found myself in the middle of a decision that seemed noble, but that hid a dirty secret. Many people think that a real mother is one who gives of herself without thinking. I thought so too, until that day, until that moment. In this video, you'll learn about everything that led me to that operating room, which made me say yes with a full heart, and what made me retreat when the truth, coming from the mouth of a child, screamed louder than all the adults put together. Because sometimes, what feels like love, it's just disguised manipulation. And in the end, it was my grandson, who was only 9 years old, who taught me to see what no one wanted me to see. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. I almost donated my kidney with a smile on my face. I was already there, lying down, my body covered by that cold hospital sheet, while the anesthesia was preparing to erase everything. The last thing I saw was the white light from the ceiling, and, behind the glass, the cold nod of my daughter-in-law. It was then that the door opened with a bang, and my grandson came running, shouting a phrase that changed everything. "Grandma, don't do that. I know why Daddy got sick." At that moment, even the scalpel fell out of the doctor's hand, and I knew that none of it was what it seemed to be. But calm down. I'll tell you how we got there. Rather, if this story has ever touched any part of your heart, I humbly ask you to accompany me to the end. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, not out of obligation, but so that other people, like me, don't feel so alone when they suspect that the love they receive may not be true. Sometimes all an old woman needs is to know that someone still hears her voice. My day started early, even before the sun painted the sky orange there in Des Moines. While the city was still sleeping, I was already on my feet, heating water for coffee and separating the threads from the seam. It wasn't a luxury, no. It was a necessity. I sewed for neighbors, fixed zippers, adjusted pants hems, hemmed curtains. Everything that appeared I accepted with gratitude. That kept me busy. It made me feel useful. Joe, my husband, spent his days in the wheelchair by the window. Since the stroke, he had barely spoken. Sometimes I babbled my name. Sometimes I blinked harder when I told something about the street. I took care of him as if he were an extension of me. She changed diapers, gave the porridge with a plastic spoon, cleaned her face with a warm cloth. It was tiring, but I never complained. We promised ourselves, in health and in sickness, and I take that seriously. After taking care of him, I went to the backyard where I keep a small vegetable garden. Basil, mint, rosemary, lavender. I picked it with affection and sold it at the farmer's market on Maple Street. Some ladies called me the healer with a good soul. It was the nickname I liked the most. The silence of my house was heavy, but I got used to it. The children already had their lives. Eric, the eldest, came from time to time, usually when he needed something. He was a good boy, but distant. After he married Ashley, he became more and more absent. And she, always very polite, always with that soulless smile. That smile that doesn't reach the eyes, you know. Brandon, my youngest, is different. He lives in a simple trailer, works hard, and always finds a way to stop by on the weekend. He never had ambition, but he always had heart. When I needed it, he was the one who took me to the doctor, looked for medicine, cleaned the roof of the house, but he never really liked to meddle. He was the kind of son who helps in silence without waiting for a medal. But who really brightened my days was Liam, the sweetest grandson God could have given me. Eric's son, but with such a different way. He would come running out of the car, hug me by the legs and say, "Tell me a story, Grandma?" Sometimes we would sit for hours in the hammock, me telling stories from when I was a girl in the countryside of Kansas, and he would look at me with those big eyes, as if everything was magic. He made me forget the pain in my back and the loneliness of the soul. It was on one of those days that everything began to change. Ashley started to show up more. She said she came to see how I was, but her gaze scanned the whole house. I sat on the couch with a tablet on my lap, asked questions about my health, asked about exams, about high blood pressure, glucose. I thought it was strange, but I answered everything naturally, until she commented, with the same tone as someone who comments on time, "Have you ever thought about donating a kidney to Eric?" That cut me inside. Not for the idea itself, because my God, if I were to save my son, I would give much more than that, but for the coldness with which she spoke, as if it were a simple favor, as if I had an obligation. And there began the seed of discomfort. In the following days, the hospital visits came, the exams, the analyses. Everything was happening so fast that I didn't even notice when they were already making me sign papers, with Ashley always around, smiling, encouraging. "It's going to be okay, Hilda. You are a strong mother. Go save your son." And I, wrapped in that cloak of guilt and duty, gave in. But inside me, something began to weigh down. And it was at this time that Liam began to act differently, more silent, more observant. He drew a lot, but the drawings changed. They started to have shadows, sad people. One day I saw a scribble of him with the figure of a woman handing a bottle to a man, hidden behind a door. He said it was an ugly dream he had. I kept that in my head. Pause here. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had that feeling that something is wrong, but no one else seems to notice? As if only you were seeing the cracks in a wall that everyone swears is perfect? If you've ever felt this, comment below with a short sentence. It can be, "I believe," or "I've lived it," just so I know I'm not talking to myself, because sometimes, knowing that someone understands, it's already a huge relief. That week, Ashley came back and said, "The hospital wants to schedule the surgery for next month. It's the best time." She said this with an enthusiasm that did not match the moment. I kept quiet. I made a coffee. And as I stirred the spoon, I felt a tear fall unintentionally into the cup. Something in me was screaming, but no one seemed to listen. Until, one cold morning, while I was sewing a blouse for Mrs. Martha, I heard Liam in the backyard saying to himself, "I'm going to tell Grandma. I'll tell you." He didn't know I was listening. At the time, my heart raced. I took the scissors, dropped the blouse, and went to him. "Tell what, my son?" He turned pale. He swallowed. "Nothing, Grandma. Just a thought." I didn't insist. But I'm a mother. And grandmother. I knew that this boy was carrying a weight that was not his. What did he know? Why did so many people seem in a hurry to see that surgery happen? And what did Ashley really want with all of this? My grandson's silence. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Ashley started coming more often. She entered my house as if it were her own, putting the keys on the kitchen counter, opening the refrigerator without asking permission, talking loudly on the phone with dirty shoes in my clean room. I brought spreadsheets, medical reports, exams with complicated words that I could barely pronounce, and I always repeated the same phrase, with that sweet tone that wrapped my stomach. "The doctor said it's your chance to save Eric. It's your obligation as a mother." I smiled from the side, but inside I already felt the wound opening. Forcing someone to love is cruelty, and dressing this obligation with phrases of faith and family is even worse. There was a morning when she arrived with a folded paper in the middle of the Bible. He placed it on the table and said, "Sign here, Hilda. Then we pray together." I refused. I said I would think about it. She forced a smile, but her eyes chilled me. They were impatient, like those who need to meet a deadline. Days later, Liam showed up here and sat quietly for almost an hour, drawing. In the end, he handed me a paper with 3 people. A woman in a dress, a man lying on a bed, and a child with his mouth open. I asked what it was. He replied without looking me in the eye, "It's a secret." That same night, I heard Ashley speaking in my backyard. I stayed behind the laundry room curtain, without making a sound. She was on the phone with someone. His voice was low but clear. He said, "Yes, she will do it. Everything is going according to plan. She doesn't even suspect it." My heart stopped. A plan? Without suspecting? I went outside and asked, "Ashley, is everything okay?" She turned around so quickly that she almost dropped her phone. "Of course, Hilda. It was just a call about the hospital insurance." I pretended to believe it, but I went to sleep with that plan hammering in my head. The next day, while I was cutting parsley in the kitchen, Liam came home early from school. He sat at the table, watched the leaves as if they were living beings. Then he blurted out of nowhere, "Grandma, can medicine make someone sick on purpose?" I dropped the knife at the same time. I looked at him, trying to stay calm. Why this question, my son? He shrugged. I only saw it in a drawing. But his face, the way his hands trembled, that didn't come from any drawing. It came from real life. That night, I looked at Joe, sleeping quietly in the chair, and thought out loud, what are they doing to us, old man? I still had no proof, only suspicions. But I already knew that something was wrong. I just didn't imagine that what was wrong. It was much deeper than I could imagine. What exactly was Ashley trying to hide from me? And why did Liam, that pure child, seem to be the only one to see what I didn't see? On a Thursday afternoon, when the sky seemed about to collapse into rain, Ashley showed up with 2 guests I hadn't expected, her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. They had never set foot in my house before, but they entered as if it were an extension of their mansion in the East Zone. Mr. Thompson, a tall man with neatly combed gray hair and strong perfume, shook my hand as if he were sealing a contract. His wife, all dressed up, with bracelets that jingled when she gesticulated, gave me 2 cold kisses on the cheeks, and commented that my room had potential with a more modern touch. I didn't understand the reason for the visit until Ashley opened an envelope and spread documents on my desk. Hilda, the surgery can be scheduled for 3 weeks from now, but the hospital needs formal confirmation. Before I said anything, Mr. Thompson began to speak in that voice of someone who is used to leading meetings and deciding destinies. Look, Hilda, we know you've done a lot for your family, and that's admirable, but a real mother gives without thinking twice. He said it with such conviction that it hurt, as if, up to that point, everything I had done for my family was less than enough. Mrs. Thompson nodded, adding, "And think about it, my dear. You've lived enough. Now it's time to think about the next generations." I felt like an old piece of furniture, something that had served, that had its time, but now it had to give way. They sat in my living room for more than an hour, drinking my coffee, talking about ethics, opportunity, and example for their grandchildren. And as they talked, I watched Joe in the wheelchair, quiet, his eyes lost, maybe listening, maybe not, as if he also had no more voice. When they finally left, they left the partially signed papers and a colorful leaflet with the hospital's logo in the center. Ashley, before leaving, put her lips to my ear and said, "You're going to do the right thing. I know it will." The next day, Eric came to visit me. He was thinner, paler. He sat down at the table with difficulty and held my hand tightly. "Mom, you have always taken care of me. He was always on my side. I know you're not going to leave me now." His eyes were wet, and that broke me inside. For a second, I forgot everything. Of the mistrust, of Ashley's words, of Liam's questions. I only saw my sick son, asking for help. I shook my head in silence, as if promising something without being sure if it can be fulfilled. But when he left, I sat there for hours, staring at the empty table. Something inside me cracked, a strange pain, different from the physical one. It was the pain of realizing that maybe I was being used. I began to remember the times I said no in my life, and how at those times I was ignored. When I asked Eric not to marry so soon, he turned his back. When I said Joe needed constant help, they sent me a nurse who came in once a week and thought they were doing too much. When I suggested that Liam spend more time with me, Ashley said he had too many activities to waste time with an old woman. Now suddenly, my yes was valuable, and my no, it would be a sentence. But what haunted me most was Liam's gaze. Every time he hugged me, I felt like he wanted to say something, that he carried something too big for a boy to keep alone. And I still didn't know what it was, but I was about to find out, because the next secret he would bring, it would change everything. Brandon arrived home on a cloudy morning, with that face of someone who slept badly and carried the world on his back. He had his hands in his pockets and his cap pulled forward, but his eyes, my youngest son's eyes always gave me everything he tried to hide. She sat on the kitchen chair, ran her hand over the back of her head and said, quietly, "Mom, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise that you will be calm." And I just replied, "I've lived through too much to not know how to listen." He took his cell phone out of his pocket and showed me the first thing. Bottles, 2, maybe 3, without a label, hidden in the back of the closet of Eric's house. I was helping him look for a document in the office and I saw this, Mom. And the worst, these medicines are not in the prescription that the hospital issued. My heart froze, and before I could react, he slid his finger across the screen and showed the second image. Ashley, wearing sunglasses, in the parking lot of the Hy-Vee supermarket, handing a manila envelope into the hands of a man I had never seen in my life. She looked around, in a hurry. I wasn't going to tell you. I thought it might be something in my head. But since she started with all this pressure from the surgery, I had the flea behind my ear. Brandon was never one to dramatize. He always had one foot on the ground, a calm that he inherited from his father. So if he was worried, it was because he had a reason. I kept looking at those images with my hands shaking, and suddenly, everything started to make sense. I remembered one day when I went to visit Eric in the hospital and Ashley was giving him a glass of yellowish liquid. Eric said it was vitamin, and she added with a smile, "It helps strengthen the body." But when he drank it, he grimaced loudly, as if he had swallowed soap. At the time I was surprised, but I let it go. Now, that glass, that blue capsule, all of this came back to me like a puzzle that suddenly began to assemble. The next day, I went to the hospital. I entered alone, without warning. I went straight to the renal ward and asked to speak to Eric's doctor. A serious gentleman, one of those who don't waste time with kindness. I sat in front of him, and with the courage that only pain gives us, I asked, "Doctor, did you give my son any vitamin in a blue capsule?" He frowned. She consulted the medical records. "No, ma'am. All prescription supplements are liquid or white tablet. Blue capsule is not part of his protocol." I felt a shiver rise up my back. I thanked him, got up and left with wobbly legs. On the sidewalk of the hospital, I had to lean on a pole so I wouldn't fall. That was no longer a suspicion. It was a real fear, a fear that took shape. Something was being hidden, something serious, and I was in the middle of it all. I stayed the rest of the day, mute. I made dinner for Joe without saying a word. Liam came to visit me and I almost cried just looking at him, because it was as if he also knew and could not tell me. I sat on the couch with him and asked, "Draw me something, my love." And he drew it. A hospital, a woman in an apron, and a boy hiding behind a door. When I asked him what it was, he replied in a low voice, "It's a secret, Grandma." He hugged me tight and didn't say anything else. My chest felt like it had a new weight. The doubt that was once just a nuisance was now a threat. And the more I thought, the more I saw. There was something wrong with Eric's illness. There was something wrong with Ashley's haste, with the hidden medicines, with the envelope in the parking lot, with that shot whispered in the backyard. And look, I'm here, opening my heart and telling this story like someone tearing up an old letter that he kept for years. If you're still with me so far, listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It's not just for me, no. It's because there's still a lot I need to tell you. And who knows, my story will help someone out there to see what's also being hidden. Because the truth, my son, the truth does not scream, but she moves in silence. And when it reveals itself, there is no turning back. And it was in that silence that I started planning what would come next. But would I be able to figure it all out in time? Or was it too late? That night, after everything I saw, heard, and felt, I sat alone in the kitchen with a bowl of warm soup in my hands. It was just chicken broth with potatoes, the same one I made for my boys when they were sick. But there, in that silence that only solitude knows how to make hurt, each spoonful seemed to carry the weight of my entire life. The whole house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and Joe's slurred breathing there in the living room, asleep sitting in the chair. And it was there that the memories began to come back, one by one, as if they had been waiting for this moment of silence to visit me. I remembered the nights when Eric was still a baby, and I would hold him until dawn. High fever, bronchitis, crying that only stopped with my soft singing, and my cold hand on his forehead. I was only 24 years old at the time, and I already knew exhaustion like few others. There was one time he had such a bad crisis that I walked 3 blocks with him on my lap, in the middle of the snow, until I found a taxi. There was no telephone at home, no car, only faith and despair. I remembered the meals I didn't make so that they had a full plate. The times when he said he was not hungry just to see the rice yield more. My children never knew about it. They didn't even need to. A real mother loves in silence. He loves with absence, love with sacrifice. I also thought about my marriage to Joe. Our altar was a borrowed room in the church, with 2 witnesses and a cake made by a neighbor. The next day, we were already working. He at a gas station, me as a cleaner at a motel at the entrance to the city. We never had luxury, but we had respect. And that was enough for me. I worked as a seamstress, caregiver for the elderly, flyer deliverer. I've had my fingers bleeding from sewing so much, and yet I continued. I never asked anyone for anything. I just wanted to raise my children and see them well. And for many years, I thought I had succeeded. Hitherto. Now, sitting there with the soup cooling and my throat tightened, I began to wonder where it was that it was all lost. I gave my whole life, my time, my youth, my health. And today, I am treated as an obstacle, as a resource, like a disposable body with a useful kidney. That wasn't a moment's pain. It was an accumulation. It was the sum of all the times I swallowed. Who said yes when he wanted to shout no, that I was good and I was forgotten. And there, looking at the bottom of the bowl, a phrase crossed me. They think I'm still that woman who only obeys. But they forgot that time teaches even silence to react. I needed to do something, and he knew exactly where to start. What I didn't know is that the next step was going to show me something even darker than I imagined. How far would anyone be able to go? When do you see a life as a bargaining chip? After that night in the kitchen, something inside me went out. It was as if the body kept moving, but the soul had asked to rest. I kept the threads, left the needles in the tin box, and stopped sewing. The neighbor sent messages, asking if I could fix that blouse, or make a quick hem for Sunday Mass. But I didn't answer. It was not out of ill will. It was because I didn't see any sense anymore. I started to avoid even Brandon's visits. She said she was tired, that Joe didn't sleep well, that he had better come another day, and he respected it. He always respected my silence, but what I felt was not tiredness. It was absence of myself. I started to go through the drawers of the old closet, there in the bedroom. I found letters from my father, newspaper clippings from the time when I helped organize the church fairs, a blue button from the first jacket I made for Eric when he was born. I grabbed a cardboard folder and started organizing documents. Marriage certificate, house deed, insurance papers. Everything there, separated. I wrote a letter to each child, one for Liam, one for Joe, and I kept them all in a white envelope with my name on top. For the first time in my life, I thought that maybe my time was coming. And the saddest thing is that I wasn't afraid. There was relief. On Sunday, I prepared a lunchbox with rice, shredded chicken, and steamed zucchini. Light food, as Eric always liked. I took the bus to the hospital. Ashley was surprised to see me. I thought it would come tomorrow. I said I wanted to advance. She forced that icy smile and accompanied me to the bedroom. Eric was asleep, but woke up when he smelled the food. "Mom, did you do that for me?" I nodded. I helped lift the back of the bed, put the lunchbox on the table, and handed over the fork. But that's when I noticed Ashley wouldn't take her eyes off him. Every bite he took, she watched, like someone who monitors, like those who supervise. And there was a moment when he stopped, said he was nauseous. She approached and said, in a very sweet voice, "You need to eat everything, love. It's important." And he continued, a little upset. I stood there, silent, with a lump in my throat. When I left, I didn't look back. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket on my lap, and my body bent over time. The sound of the living room clock was the only living thing in that house. Joe was already asleep. The branches of the tree in the backyard swayed in the December wind. I asked myself, why continue? I felt like an old piece, a forgotten piece of furniture in a corner of the house, a soul out of place. But it was there, in the middle of nowhere, that Liam appeared. He arrived with his father, who stayed in the car, and came running to me with a piece of paper in his hands. "I did this at school, Grandma. It's for you." I took the drawing carefully. It was me, in a red cape, flying over a hospital, and underneath was written in crooked letters, "You are my hero." My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I held back my tears in front of him, said I had loved the gift, that I was going to stick it on the refrigerator door, but inside, I was in ruins. Sometimes, Those who hold the world on their backs also collapse, but he does it in secret, so as not to worry anyone. And it was at that moment, looking at that colorful drawing, that a phrase escaped my thought. If you got here with me, don't let go of my hand now. What's next? It's what no one ever imagined. That same night, I wrote the first lines of my will. It wasn't about money. It was about truth and justice. But before you sign, I needed to be sure what was behind all of this. And this certainty, it would come in the form of a recording. Who did it? And what did it show? I didn't know yet, but the answer was closer than I could have imagined. The next morning, I got up with a heavy heart, but a firm step. I put on my bank-going outfit, that dark skirt that has accompanied me to Brandon's funeral, baptism, and even graduation. I tied my hair in a tight bun and pulled the surgery papers out of the closet drawer. But this time, I didn't put it in my bag. I put it in an old sewing box and stuck it in the back of the wardrobe. I knew that this could seem little, but for me, it was my first gesture of defense. I needed time. Is that it? Time to understand. Time to confirm everything I felt, but I still couldn't prove it. I went to the hospital and asked to postpone the surgery for personal reasons. I used that term because I knew they couldn't contest it. The attendant made a doubtful face but nodded. It's okay, Mrs. Hilda. We can reschedule it for February. February? It was an extra month of life for me. A month to look into everyone's eyes and see who was lying. When I returned home, Brandon was already waiting for me sitting on the porch, with his face tense and his cap tight on his forehead. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and, in that direct way that only he has, said, "Mom, listen to this." I played the recording. The voice was Ashley's. Cold, calm, articulate. After the transplant, the research data will be in our hands. The hospital does not need to know everything. The important thing is to have the sample alive. Then Mr. Thompson's voice. With Hilda and Eric's genetics, you can guarantee full value. I've done it before. And finally, Mrs. Thompson laughing. It's the advantage of having an obedient mother-in-law. I paused. My fingers trembled. It was true. It was all true. I wasn't just a mother giving for love. I was part of a plan. A disposable piece in a gear of interest, profit, and manipulation. And look, if there's one thing that life has taught me, it's that no one destroys those who know how to shut up at the right time. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to scream. It wasn't going to make a scandal. I was going to protect myself in silence. The next day, I sent a message to the hospital officially canceling the donation, with no new date. She said she was reviewing my health, my exams, and that she would communicate when she was ready. The answer was dry, bureaucratic, but I knew that on the other side, there would be an earthquake, and it did. Ashley appeared in the late afternoon with wide eyes and an expression that mixed fury and panic. He didn't even knock on the door. He went straight in, with his bag across his chest. "Hilda, what have you done?" I kept stirring the chamomile tea, without looking up. I postponed it. That's all. She slammed her hand on the table. "Are you going to kill your own son?" It was the first time she screamed, and it was the first time I answered without trembling. Whoever wants to save does not hurry to destroy whoever is nearby. She stared at me as if she saw another woman, because at that moment, she really saw it. Hilda, who lowered her head, was gone, and in her place was a wounded woman, but standing. A woman who has been a seamstress, cleaner, mother at dawn, and nurse without a degree, and that now he knew how to protect himself. I went back to the living room, sat next to Joe and turned on the radio to an old song, the kind we danced to in the dances of our youth. Ashley left without saying anything else. The noise of the door slamming still echoes in my memory, but in that sound, there was freedom, because there is a moment in our lives that we get tired. It's tired of being strong for everyone, to swallow hard, of giving and not receiving. And in this tiredness, a new courage is born. The courage to stop, to say no, to save yourself before saving others. And if you've been through this, even if in silence, comment here with me. He says, "I know what it's like," or "I understand you." Because, look, sometimes all we need is a look that says, "You're not alone." I spent my whole life silent, but now I speak, even if it's only with those who listen on the other side of this screen. And as night fell, and the wind made the curtains dance slowly, I wondered, how far else would they be willing to go? To keep the plan standing? The the answer would come from where I least expected it. Because someone, very close, was about to confess what no one had the courage to tell. I thought that, after that confrontation with Ashley, I would have at least a few days of peace, but life sometimes likes to test us at the limit, just before changing the course of the story. 2 days later, my home phone started ringing nonstop. It was the hospital. It was the social worker. He was a doctor I had never seen, all with the same phrase hidden behind beautiful words. "We need you to come to finish the preparations for the surgery." I said that I had postponed it, that I still needed to think, that my heart was not at peace, but they replied that I had already signed the documents, that the protocol was in progress, that my son's health was deteriorating too fast for retreats. Their pressure seemed to come from all sides, as if even the walls of my kitchen had become witnesses to my fear. Worse, Ashley began to appear as if she were the perfect wife, crying in the hospital hallway, telling the doctors that I was emotionally shaken, that I didn't know what I was doing, that Eric wouldn't survive if I faltered again. She trembled her hands, made her voice fail, and I saw the doctors believe it. I watched everything with a silence that tore me inside. They embraced her, comforted her, offered support, and I stood there, looking like the cold mother who didn't want to help her own son. Her parents began to spread stories. They spoke to the pastor of the local church, the same one who baptized my boys, and said that I was putting my life above my son's. On Sunday, at the time of the service, some people avoided looking in my direction. Others looked at me with pity. It was as if the whole city had been painted with their version. I, who had always spent my life helping those in need, was now seen as a selfish mother, and I had no way to defend myself without exposing what I still didn't have enough evidence to support. Eric got worse. Each day I went to visit him, he looked paler, more tired, more frail. One day, when I entered the room, he couldn't even look up straight. "Mom, if you don't help me, I'm going to die," he said in a voice so weak it seemed to come from another world. My legs wobbled. I held on to the railing of the bed so I wouldn't fall, because hearing that from the mouth of the child you carried in your arms, fed, healed, protected from everything, it's as if the heart cracked in half. I wanted to shout to him that I would do everything, but I also wanted to say that there was something wrong, that I felt it in my bones, but I didn't find the courage, not even words, only silence left. The next day, I received the final call from the hospital. "Mrs. Hilda, we need you here tomorrow at 7 in the morning to start the preoperative hospitalization." I didn't answer. I just stood, holding the phone with a shaky hand, looking out the window at the quiet street of Des Moines, as if the world wasn't about to collapse. When I hung up, I went to the bedroom, put a change of clothes in the bag, and left it next to the door. Joe watched me from the wheelchair, his eyes lost but wet. He didn't speak anymore, but at that moment, seemed to try. His mouth trembled, as if he wanted to say my name, but not a word came out. I put my hand on his and said, "I know, old man, I know." And that was enough to make me cry alone in the bathroom. At dawn, I couldn't sleep. The whole house seemed very quiet, very empty. I wrote a few more lines in my notebook. It wasn't exactly a formal will, but it was all I could leave in case something happened. I wrote to Liam that he was my light. I wrote to Brandon that he was always the most attentive, even when no one noticed. I wrote to Eric saying that I never stopped loving him. I closed the notebook carefully. The dawn smelled like farewell. The next day, I was taken to the hospital by ambulance because they said it was safer. Lying on that stretcher, feeling the rocking of the vehicle and listening to the distant sound of the siren. All of this made me feel as if I was being led to a destination from which I could no longer escape. When we arrived at Mercy One, I was placed in a cold hallway, with lights that seemed to illuminate even the thoughts I was trying to hide. The doctor explained to me the procedure, the anesthesia, the risks. I just shook my head. My voice was gone. I signed a few more papers. I think my name came out so crooked that I didn't even recognize myself anymore. The feeling was that I was out of my mind, as if my body had gone on its own, while my soul sat in the living room, embracing the drawing that Liam made. The stretcher began to move, pushed by 2 nurses. The strong smell of disinfectant hit my nose. When we entered the operating room, the cold of the metal cut me all the way. The white light on the ceiling looked like a dead sun, shining without heat. The surgeon approached. adjusting his gloves. "We'll start in a moment, Mrs. Hilda." I closed my eyes, feeling a tear run down my temple. That was it. There was no turning back. There was no way out. I thought of Joe. I thought about my boys. I thought of Liam. And I thought, was God still looking at me? And it was exactly at that moment, at that second when the anesthesiologist raised the syringe, that a deafening noise came from the door, as if someone had torn the silence in half. The door slammed. Nurses screamed. The air seemed to split. And I heard small steps, corridors. Certain. Who would dare to enter there? And why? The answer. It would change everything. Lying on the stretcher, feeling the cold of the room and the strong smell of disinfectant, I closed my eyes and began to pray softly. My voice trembled, but it was only between me and God. I thought of Joe, there, motionless in the wheelchair, always watching in silence, in Brandon's watchful eyes, always careful, and in Liam's innocent smile, who still believed I was his hero. Each memory was an anchor, holding my heart so that it wouldn't sink into despair for good. And at that moment, a phrase echoed strongly in my mind. I was good. I was forgotten. Now, I am free. Freedom, a word that seemed to dance in my thoughts, igniting a spark I hadn't felt in years. I knew I needed the truth before any anesthesia, before anyone made a decision about my body without me having all the answers. As the stretcher was pushed through the bright white hallways of Mercy One, I felt my heart race. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The lights reflected off the porcelain floor. The nurse's footsteps sounded like hammers in my head, and each door that opened revealed shadows I could not yet decipher. That's when I saw her, Ashley, with her icy smile, handing an envelope to a man in a cap, leaning discreetly against the wall of the hallway. The same man in the photos Brandon had shown days before. My stomach tightened. The suspicion, once a fearful murmur in my mind, was now an incontrovertible certainty. They were plotting something much bigger than just Eric's surgery. My fingers clenched into a fist over the sheet. I couldn't just accept everything. Not this time. Not after everything I discovered. But he still needed time. Time to get concrete proof that no one could deny. Every step I took, every movement of the stretcher, every look at the envelope, was a dance with the decision to act or remain submissive. I knew my time to fight back quietly had come. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to run. I didn't need to risk it now. But every fiber of my body screamed, no more silence. As I watched that exchange in the hallway, a strange feeling came over me. Fear and courage mixed, like a hot liquid running down my chest. I felt like I was about to enter a new chapter of my life, a chapter that I would write with my own hands. For the first time, it was not just a mother who gave in. She was a woman who decided, a woman who planned, a woman who would demand justice and truth before any sacrifice. And I promised myself, no one would manipulate my children anymore. No one would use my body as currency anymore. And no one would dare to forget me anymore. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think. It's not just about me. It's about all the women who have ever felt trapped, forgotten, used. It's about getting up, finding strength, and taking action, even if silently, even if it seems impossible. I was about to find out how far I could go, and more importantly, how far they would go to keep their secret. As the stretcher advanced, my thoughts swirled like a whirlwind. Every memory of sacrifice, every sleepless night, every wound on my hands from sewing so much, now turned into determination. I needed hard evidence, not just intuition. And the truth, I knew, was there, before my eyes. But there was still an obstacle: time. I needed to buy enough time to organize my pieces, to piece together every shred of evidence that could tip the scales against them. And the clock seemed to mock me, every second faster, every step more urgent. The man in the cap received the envelope, gave an almost imperceptible wave, and disappeared through the back door. Ashley walked down the aisle again, her countenance unchanged, but I noticed a slight tremor in her hands, a small, almost imperceptible sign that told me that they did not have full control over everything. And I felt a spark of hope, because even though it looked like I was cornered, there was still a gap, a foothold that I could use. I just needed to stay calm, observe, and wait for the right moment. As I waited, My thoughts drifted back to Liam. The little one, with his superheroine drawing, unknowingly gave me strength. If he believed in me, if he saw in me a heroine, I couldn't let him down. I needed to be strong. I need to be strategic. Every move would now be calculated. Every word said or not said, every gesture, every silence, would carry weight. I was about to enter a silent battle, where wits and patience would be my sharpest weapons. And there, lying on the stretcher, with the cold of the hospital crossing me, I realized that this moment was not about fear. It was about control. Control of my life, my body, my family. The surgery could wait. The envelope, the man in the cap, the plot I was beginning to unravel. Everything had to be understood before any decision was final. I was ready to act, but I needed the right moment, and I knew he was coming. The feeling that something big was about to happen, that the turn was just a few moments away, gave me a shiver, but also a strange peace. As I closed my eyes again, I took a deep breath and thought, every step I take will be for the love of my children, for the respect of my own life, and for the future of my grandson. I could no longer allow the selfishness of others to decide my fate, and even though the road ahead was uncertain and dangerous, I felt like I was finally in control of something that had previously been taken away from me, the truth. And the truth, I knew, would change everything. The question that echoed in my mind was clear. Would I have the courage to reveal everything and confront those who thought they owned my family? And more importantly, would the truth that was about to come out save my son or bring consequences that no one could have predicted? I could still feel the icy metal of the stretcher against my back as the nurse brought the anesthesia mask close to my face. The chemical smell began to take over the air, and for a moment, I thought my body was going to detach from me. Dr. Harris muttered something about counting to 10 as he adjusted the instruments. I closed my eyes, trying to pray for the last time before everything went dark, when suddenly a loud bang cut through the room like lightning. The door was blown open with such force that even the IV stand wobbled. I opened my eyes in fright, and for a second I thought I was dreaming. But no. There, right in front of me, was Liam, my little boy, the school uniform dirty with dirt, the untied shoe, the messy hair, and his chest heaving as if he had run the whole city. "Grandma, wait! Don't do that!" His voice pierced the room like an arrow. The nurse screamed. Another tried to hold him, but he broke free with the desperate strength of someone who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. He held the old cell phone with both hands, as if it were a treasure, and then he said, teary-eyed, "I know why Daddy got sick." The room was muted, a silence so deep that you could hear the ticking of the clock outside in the hallway. Dr. Harris raised his hand immediately, canceling the procedure. The mask was pulled away from my face. The scalpel, which the assistant was holding, fell to the ground with a dry noise that echoed like a sentence. For a moment, I felt that my heart had stopped. Outside the glass, I heard Ashley's voice rise hysterically. "Don't listen to that child. He doesn't know what he's saying." But her desperation, that despair was not that of a worried mother. He was of someone who sees his own lie falling like a house of cards. Liam, shaking from head to toe, held up his phone. "I need to show. I need it," he said, with that urgency that only the truth has. Dr. Harris approached slowly, his brows furrowed, and said, "Show it, son. You're safe here." Liam pressed the play button with a dirty thumb. The recording started low, but clear. Ashley's voice came out of the room like spilled poison. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. This old woman won't refuse." My soul left the body. I felt it. The floor seemed to disappear. My heart was beating so hard that I thought the monitors were going to go off. The nurse put her hand to her mouth. The anesthesiologist dropped the clipboard. Dr. Harris turned pale, and I just looked at my grandson, who was holding his phone so tightly that his fingers turned white. "Grandma, I heard it on Mommy's cell phone," he whispered. They were talking about you." And it was there, in that moment frozen in time, that I realized everything I feared, everything I suspected, everything they tried to hide, was in front of me. No one else could deny it. No one else could silence me. And it's strange, so strange, how life sometimes gives us the truth at the very moment when we were about to lose everything. It was there that I felt inside my chest the certainty that the worst part had not even been said. Because, my God, if you knew what was yet to come, you would stay here with me until the end. The atmosphere in the room changed. It was no longer a surgery. It was a silent court. All eyes were slowly turning to me, as if they expected me to say something, but I couldn't. My voice was caught between pain and relief. Outside, Ashley's voice echoed again, more desperate, higher, more guilty. That's a lie. He was manipulated, but it was too late. The mask had fallen. The first truth had been exposed, and I knew deep down, that Liam hadn't shown everything yet, because he trembled as if holding more than one secret, more than an audio. He held the loose thread of a ball that, if pulled, it would open all the doors they tried to lock. What else did he have to reveal? What else did a 9-year-old child still carry, alone, to save his grandmother? I was still lying on the stretcher, feeling my heart struggle to keep up with everything that was happening, when Liam wiped his nose with the sleeve of his shirt and said, in that small voice that always took me apart, "Grandma, there's more." The whole room turned to him. Dr. Harris stepped forward, as if sensing that something much greater was about to be revealed. Liam held his phone carefully, as if he were carrying an injured bird that could break at any moment, and opened another audio file. His fingers trembled, but his eyes had a courage that I will never forget as long as I live. And then, the second recording began. Ashley's voice came first, this time lower, more calculated. "After the transplant happens, we can send the data directly to the group. It's just a matter of signing." The sound of paper being handled appeared soon after. Then Mr. Thompson's voice, full of assurance, almost triumphant. "With an elderly patient and a son in kidney failure, no one suspects anything. The tests will feel like part of the post-operative period." And finally, like a sharp blade, Mrs. Thompson's voice. "And the best thing is that the payment is in international dollars. This money will put us at the level we deserve." The silence that formed after this passage was not the same silence as before. It was heavy, sharp, deadly. The kind of silence that denounces crime. The kind of silence that precedes the fall of a dirty empire. Dr. Harris was livid, his hand flat on his chest, as if he had been beaten. He took a step back, another step forward, then raised his hand and said in a firm, authoritative, and now indignant voice, "This surgery is suspended. Immediately." The nurses stopped where they were. The anesthesiologist turned off the machine. The syringe was removed from the tray. The entire operating room breathed again, and so did I. For the first time in a long time, my breathing became light, still lying down, still weak, still vulnerable, but finally free from that fate they were trying to push me to. I felt a tear run down the side of my face, not of fear, but of gratitude. It was at that moment that a bang came from the hallway. The door, which Liam had previously walked through, now opened violently once again. Ashley appeared like a figure, her face red, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide. "Give me that cell phone, Liam. Now!" A nurse tried to stop her, but she pushed the woman so hard that she almost knocked her down. I had never seen that hatred on her face. The mask of sweetness, of false concern, had fallen off in one piece. She advanced towards my grandson, her fingers outstretched, ready to snatch the cell phone from his hand. But before she could, a strong hand grabbed her arm. It was Brandon, my boy, my youngest son, always so quiet, so patient, so discreet. He held Ashley's arm firmly, his eyes sparking a pain that only those who have held on to the suffering stored for too long know. And then he said, in a voice I had never heard come out of that body, "You poisoned my brother." The sentence was suspended in the air, as if it had been written on fire. Ashley tried to break free, screaming, "Lie! You don't know anything!" But Brandon squeezed her arm, brought her face closer and repeated, lower, more serious, more accurate, "You poisoned my brother." Chaos ensued. Nurses rushed. A security guard appeared out of nowhere. The classroom alarm went off, and I, lying there, between cold lights and desperate voices, felt something strange happen inside me. It was not fear. It wasn't panic. It was the beginning of the end of the lie. It was the truth, finally cutting through the air, clearing the way, illuminating what was once darkness. And it was in this whirlwind that a thought crossed me like a hot breath. Sometimes, a single memory, a phrase, A look, a gesture, has the strength to change everything that comes after. We carry these memories like small lanterns lit inside our chests. And now I ask you, with my open heart, do you also have a memory like this, which you have never forgotten? What made you see someone in a new way? If so, share it with me in the comments. It can be something small, simple, but true. Sometimes, it is from these memories that our courage is born. The room was still filled with screams and running. Ashley tried to free herself from Brandon, who wouldn't budge. Liam leaned against the wall, shutting his phone against his chest. Dr. Harris was screaming for backup, and I only thought about one thing. If all that had already come to light, what still needed to be revealed? Because, the way Ashley struggled, I was sure there was still a bigger and darker truth hidden somewhere, and this truth was about to appear. I sat slowly on the stretcher, still with my body trembling, but my soul firm as it had not been for many years. The operating room seemed like another place now, no longer an operating room, but a makeshift courtroom, with cold lights revealing all that had previously lurked in the shadows. The doctors formed a silent semicircle. The security guards tried to maintain order, and my family, so divided and so hurt, was there, reunited for the first time in a long time, but for a reason I would never have imagined living. Ashley was pushed into the center of the room by the security guards, still trying to extricate herself, still trying to look in control, but her gaze betrayed that the lie had come to an end. I looked up, took a deep breath, and asked, with the calm of someone who carries decades of life on his back, "Why did you do this to my son?" My voice came out low but firm. The whole room listened. Ashley blinked quickly, as if looking for an excuse in the corners of her mind. I loved him. I wanted to save Eric. It was a safe experiment. It was to help. You don't understand, Hilda. She tried to talk to me as before, with that fake poison-laden sweetness, but now no one else fell into the trap. Brandon stepped forward, still holding her arm, and said, "Save? You destroyed him." Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, placing himself between his daughter and the doctors, as if he had some authority there. "We did it for science. You don't understand the value of advanced search. This country needs medical breakthroughs, and tests like this are essential. There was no real danger." Mrs. Thompson agreed, fiddling with the expensive necklace that gleamed under the lights. "It was all very calculated. The data you would generate would be worth more than any ordinary treatment could offer." Dr. Harris raised his hand, and the room fell silent. "You put a patient's life on the line to manipulate an illegal clinical trial," he said, his voice as sharp as a scalpel. "This is not science. This is a federal crime." The impact of his words made the air seem even heavier. Ashley looked to her parents, seeking support, but even they seemed shaken now that a renowned doctor was denouncing everything there, in front of everyone. She began to sob, but it wasn't sadness. It was fear. Fear of the truth. Fear of justice. Fear of what was to come. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just watched. My whole life, I have learned that there are silences that say more than any scream. My gaze ran over Ashley's face, that face that so often pretended to love, feigned concern, pretended to be part of my family, and in that moment, she understood that my silence was the verdict she could never avoid. Brandon approached me, putting his hand on my shoulder. I didn't cry, not yet, because in the midst of all that chaos, a greater truth began to form inside me, something that no one there seemed to have realized yet, something that was about to change everything once again. If the experiment depended on transplantation, if they were in such a hurry, if Eric's illness was part of something bigger. So the question that burned in my chest was simple but terrible. Could it be that what Liam had revealed? Wasn't it still the worst? And what else was hidden in the shadows of this dark history, waiting to come to light? When they finally took me out of the operating room, still with that smell of alcohol impregnated on my skin, I felt that something inside me had changed forever. It wasn't just relief. It wasn't just indignation. Firmness. A firmness that I had not felt since I was a girl, when I faced life with my own hands, with no one to hold me. I was accommodated in a small room, with beige walls and a window that overlooked the parking lot. The morning sun was beginning to rise, shy but present. And I knew, in that instant, that sun was not only rising for the new day, It was rising for me, too. A social worker entered the room with a clipboard. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a sincere kindness there. "Mrs. Hilda, we need to formalize the refusal of surgery. Do you want to stick to your decision? I've never spoken so firmly in my life. Yes. Officially. Definitely." She handed me a form. I read each line calmly, and I signed it. I signed with my trembling handwriting, but with complete courage. When I returned the clipboard, I felt as if I had cut the last rope that still attached me to their plan. Brandon arrived soon after, panting, his eyes still red from the turmoil. He had in a folder all the photos, audios, messages, documents that he and Liam had gathered, much more than I imagined. "Mom, I have already spoken to the hospital's lawyers. There are people from the council coming here. They will investigate everything." He opened the briefcase on the table. That pile of papers looked like a map of hell that almost swallowed our family. Photographs of unlabeled medicine bottles, screenshots of messages, the recordings that Liam had found. And in the middle of it all, Eric's photo before he got sick. Smiling, strong, full of life. My boy. The hospital's lawyers entered the room with the gravity of someone carrying the weight of a bomb about to explode. They explained to me that there were protocols being violated, that the case needed to be referred to the federal authorities, that it was no longer a health issue, but organized crime. I listened to everything with the calm of someone who already knew, deep down, that it had stopped being about me a long time ago. I asked to see my son. They took me to a side room. There was Eric, lying, pale as a freshly washed sheet. He looked smaller, curled up in bed. My heart ached. He didn't know anything yet. I didn't know about the manipulations. I didn't know about the recordings. He didn't know about the plan. He was a victim, like me, maybe even more than me. I approached slowly, sat next to him and held his hand. The skin was warm, thin, almost transparent. He opened his eyes slowly. "Mom, why did you stop the surgery?" His question came without charge. Alone. Fear. I took a deep breath and felt the weight of being a mother tighten my chest. I adjusted his sheet, as I did when he was a child, and said in the voice God gave me at that moment, "I would save you with my own blood, son. I would give everything I have, but I will not save a criminal plan with my silence." He frowned, confused. "Plan? Criminal?" I ran my hand through his hair, so thin now, and replied quietly, "You'll know everything, but not now. Now you need to rest, and trust that your mother has finally woken up." Outside the glass, Ashley was brought in by security guards, still trying to compose herself, her theater dripping from the corners of her mouth. When she saw me sitting next to Eric, she tried to get closer, feigning desperation. "Hilda, I was manipulated. They forced me." Her parents appeared in the back, equally pale, trying to maintain some posture, but it was too late. Dr. Harris folded his arms and said, loud enough for all to hear, "You will all be investigated." No word spoken now erases what has already been recorded. Ashley began to cry, but it was not a cry of regret. It was the cry of those who see the ground open, of those who lose control, of those who lose power. Brandon put himself among us. He didn't let her get close to her brother. "Enough," he said. "It's over." And in that instant, looking at all of them, I realized that my entire life had been marked by silent choices. I've always been good. I always did. I have always trusted. And that's why they used me. They erased me. They bent me. But now, finally, I was upright, whole. And no one was ever going to shut me up again. When I left the room, the lawyers were waiting for me in the hallway. "Mrs. Hilda, we will need you to hand everything over to the authorities. The recordings, documents, anything." I nodded. "Do whatever it takes. I'm not afraid anymore." And it was true. For the first time in many years, fear had left my body. It left room for something new, something strong, something I hadn't felt since Joe was healthy and my kids ran around the yard. Dignity. But as I walked down the hall, something went through me like a sharp twinge. A question that I still didn't have the courage to answer. A doubt that grew from the first day I realized that something was wrong. Because if Ashley and her parents were behind it all, if there was a forbidden remedy, if there was money involved, if there was an experiment, so what, exactly, had made my son sick in the first place? And was I prepared to hear the answer that was coming? When I left Eric's room and returned to the main hallway, it seemed that the entire hospital had changed color. The white of the walls was no longer a sign of peace. It was the stage where the masks were falling one by one. Ashley was sitting in a chair near the reception, her face stained with tears. But they were not tears that came from the soul. They were trained, calculated tears of those who try to extract pity where there is no more. As I approached, she raised her hands, trembling. "Hilda, I did everything for him. You need to believe. They said it was safe, that it was a new treatment. I just wanted to save Eric." Her voice had that usual rehearsed melody, but now, without the veil of lies, every word sounded hollow. I just watched her heart heavy but steadfast, because sometimes listening hurts less than responding. As she spoke, I noticed Mr. Thompson in the corner of the hallway, talking too quietly to a young nurse. He held his wallet open. I saw some folded notes, hidden among documents. His hand trembled not with regret, but with despair. I moved a little closer, slowly, to listen. "You just need to get that boy's cell phone," he said, his voice barely audible. "Erase everything and give it to me. I double the amount." The nurse immediately recoiled, as if he had seen fire. "This is illegal, sir." "And I'm recording." That sentence pierced me like an icy wind. The nurse held up his cell phone discreetly, showing that the bribery attempt was registered. Within seconds, 2 security guards were already walking towards the Thompsons. Mr. Thompson tried to disguise himself, to close his wallet, to adjust his jacket, but there was no way to hide. His pride, as great as the very mask he had always worn, was in ruins. Mrs. Thompson, seeing that the situation was out of control, put her hand to her breast and fell to her knees on the floor, feigning a faint so theatrical that even a child would notice. I can't breathe. Someone, please." No doctor approached. No nurse. The silence that followed was as strong as a slap. Dr. Harris appeared across the hall and said, "Our staff will not serve any of you. We will call the external service." Mrs. Thompson's face contorted. It was more frustration than real pain. She opened her eyes discreetly, saw that no one believed her, and closed it again, trying to keep the staging going as long as she could. I stood there watching. He didn't need to intervene. He didn't need to raise his voice. The whole castle of appearances of that family was crumbling right before my eyes, and not because I did anything, but because the truth, when it finally finds space, has its own strength. Brandon approached me, put a firm hand on my arm and whispered, "Mom, I made the complaint." I understood right away. The media, justice, everything they feared most. We walked to the window of the corridor and downstairs. It was already possible to see the first cars of reporters parking, cameras being adjusted, microphones raised. The Thompsons' elegant facade, built over decades, was about to be dismantled in public. And I stood there, with Liam by my side, holding my hand as if it was even smaller than it really was. He leaned his head on my arm and said quietly, "Grandma, they're not going to hurt Dad anymore, right?" The weight of that request was stuck in my chest. I didn't have all the answers, but I had a promise. I leaned in a little and kissed the top of his head. "No, my love, they won't." I looked around. The Thompsons argued with the security guards. Ashley tried to call someone. No one answered. The nurses watched from a distance, indignant. The reception was agitated with rumors, questions, rumors. It was as if the world had decided, at that moment, to align all the pieces that had previously been loose and had hidden the truth for so long. And as strange as it sounds, as I watched all of this, I felt a quiet peace inside me. A peace that does not come from victory, nor from revenge, but the end of fear. Because there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So, if my outburst found you in any hard moment, enjoy this video and subscribe. I don't do it by numbers. I do it because there are still many people in the world who need to know that the truth always finds a way out. But even with all this chaos exposed, with masks on the floor and secrets running through the hospital corridors, there was still a question that burned inside me, insistent, relentless, like a whisper that does not want to be silenced. If they were capable of all this, how far exactly they had gone before they were discovered. When federal authorities arrived at the hospital, everything was so quiet that even the noise of the air conditioning seemed exaggerated. I was sitting in a wheelchair, still in my nightgown, with a thin blanket over my legs, when I saw 2 officers entering the main hallway, accompanied by the hospital's legal counsel and Dr. Harris. It was like watching thunder slowly, but inevitably approach. They called Ashley and her parents by their full names, and when handcuffs appeared, there was no more room for pretense. Ashley tried to back down, screamed that it was injustice, that they were interpreting everything wrong, that she was the victim of a setup. But his voice, so trained to manipulate, sounded too fragile now, almost childish, almost empty. Mr. Thompson tried to argue, quoted lawyers, cited influence, cited good intention. Nothing was enough. The handcuffs closed with a dry click, which echoed in the hallway like a sentence the whole world had been waiting to hear. Mrs. Thompson cried, or pretended to cry. No one knew anymore, and maybe no one cared. The hospital, which had once seemed so divided, now moved as one body. Nurses delivered reports. Doctors showed medical records. Each piece of the puzzle that had previously tortured me alone was now being put together by experienced hands. And they did not hide their indignation. Using a vulnerable patient to cover up illegal experiments, this surpasses any human limit. I listened to it with a strange feeling inside, a mixture of disappointment and justice. Disappointment because all that was really happening. Justice because finally someone was looking, listening, doing something. But the hardest blow was yet to come. When Eric found out about everything, he had a crisis. I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, his shoulders swaying as he cried. It wasn't the cry of physical pain. It was the cry of someone who had the world snatched from their hands at once. He could barely breathe when he lifted his face to me. "Mom, forgive me," he repeated like a lost boy. I trusted her. I thought she wanted to help me. I was so blind. My heart broke in silence. So many times I held him when he was little, when he was afraid of the dark, when he fell off his bike, when he burned his finger on the stove. And here he was again, no longer a boy, but as fragile as before, asking forgiveness for trusting. I approached, sat next to him carefully, and held his cold hand between mine. "You're still my son," I muttered. "What she did, it wasn't your fault. But now, my love, you will have to relearn what love is. Real love. The one who doesn't charge anything. The one who does not arrest. The one who does not hurt." He cried even harder, leaning his forehead against my shoulder. And in that moment, I felt that, despite everything, there was still hope inside him. He just needed to find a way to be born again. Brandon became his brother's shadow. He talked to doctors, questioned treatments, organized documents, signed authorizations. It was as if all the strength he had kept his entire life had finally found a purpose. He said little, but did a lot. It was the kind of silent love that had always existed, even when no one paid attention. And I, observing my two children so different and so connected by a pain they didn't choose, thought to myself, sometimes, a mother's love is the only line that prevents a family from falling apart completely. And at that moment I felt, with all my wrinkles and stories, that my mission there was not yet over. Outside, the press was already setting up cameras, microphones, cables, as if the hospital were a movie scene. Some people tried to approach me, ask questions, ask for interviews. I looked away, nodded, but kept walking. I didn't want fame. I didn't want headlines. I just wanted to go back to my home, to my smell of mint in the kitchen, to my seams, to my silences. But it was too late to be invisible again. In Des Moines, everyone already knew my name. In the neighborhood, they looked at me as if I had won a war. In the market, they offered me help that they had never offered before. And deep in my chest, even with all the fatigue in the world, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, that maybe I had recovered a part of me that had been swallowed up by life. And yet, as I walked out of the hospital on that cold Iowa evening, with Liam holding my hand and Brandon supporting my elbow, something inside me whispered insistently, the story isn't over yet. Because although justice had begun, there was a question that no one had asked out loud, and that needed to be answered before everything finally found peace. News of Ashley's loss of license ran through Des Moines, like a dry, fast, crackling cornfield wind. I knew before they even opened the newspapers that morning. A nurse at the hospital called me, her voice low, almost apologizing for carrying such heavy gossip. "Hilda, she can no longer exercise. The investigation left no loopholes." I just thanked him. I felt no joy, No revenge. I felt a kind of silence inside, as when a storm finally withdraws and leaves the fields soaked but breathing again. A few days later, the news about the Thompson family arrived. Frozen assets. Accounts investigated. Cars parked in front of that big house on Westover Boulevard, which always seemed too big for so much coldness. The press stayed there for hours, filming everything, as if they were going to record the decline of a dynasty, and in a way, it was. Every day, new details emerged. The scheme was bigger than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just my son. It wasn't just Des Moines. They found that elderly people from Nebraska, Illinois, and Minnesota had been used as guinea pigs in clandestine tests, some of them as frail as Joe. When I read this, my hands trembled. I thought of my husband, sitting in the wheelchair, so quiet, so defenseless. I thought about what would have happened if they had chosen him, or any other father, mother, grandmother. It was at that moment that I realized that the whole story was never just about me, not only about Eric, not just about Ashley. It was about a kind of evil that grows when no one looks. And I had looked. A simple old woman, as many like to say. But I looked. The first time I saw my name in the newspaper, I almost dropped the coffee. A neighbor left the copy at my gate. The headline read, "The Grandmother Who Exposed a Fraudulent Bioethics Scheme." I read that about 3 times. Not out of pride, but because it was strange to see my life written there, in such large letters, as if it were someone else's story. I have always been invisible. I've always been that woman who passes by with bags from the market, who sews other people's clothes, who waits for buses on the corner, who no one greets. Suddenly, I was View. And he didn't quite know what to do with it. I started to politely decline interviews. When they knocked on the gate, asking if I wanted to tell my side, I just said, "I tell my story to those who lived with me," and he went back inside. My life went on almost the same. I made tea on the porch every morning. I sewed at night, with my old needles and my little bottles of thread. He picked mint from the yard, listening to the sound of the wind passing between the leaves of the maple behind the house. The difference was that now, when I went to the farmer's market, some waved at me from afar. One lady offered me a bag of cookies and said, "The city is proud of you." I blushed like a girl, not because I wanted recognition, but because it had been so many years since anyone said something nice to me without wanting anything in return. And Liam. Oh, my little Liam. He started coming almost every day after school. Sometimes with a crooked backpack, sometimes with shoes untied, but always with that look of someone who carries a soul older than age allows. He helped me water the plants, made drawings, told me stories from science class, asked if I had ever thought about writing a book. I laughed. He said that the only thing I wrote were shopping lists. But inside, as I watched him play in the backyard, I felt something come back to my chest, something like joy, like peace. It was as if, after so many years of being just a caregiver, worker, donor, I was back to being a grandmother, only grandmother. The traitors, meanwhile, faced their own trials, the moral and the legal. And I can say one thing, morale is always heavier. I saw a news report in which Ashley was taken out of the courtroom, hiding her face behind her hands. There was no more elegance. There was no more charm. There was no audience to applaud or defend. The Thompsons also showed up, and for the first time in decades, they weren't wearing expensive clothes or superior expressions. They seemed smaller, not physically, but in spirit, stripped of everything that once protected them. And at that point in the story, I realized something I never imagined I would feel. Pity. Not for them, not for crimes, not for choices, but pity for the emptiness. Because who is able to do what they did? I never knew what love is. And this is a punishment that no prison corrects. Meanwhile, my house remained calm, as if the outside world was another reality. Liam, one day, while drawing on my desk, raised his head and said, "Grandma, do you think it's all over now?" I looked at him fondly, ran my hand through his hair, but I didn't answer, because inside me, something still told me that the story wasn't over, not while one last truth was still hidden, waiting to appear. And when that last truth came, well, I knew she would change everything once again. I sat on the old swing in the backyard on that cold afternoon, the Iowa sky so gray it seemed to weigh down the houses, and the wind beating on the dry leaves as if flipping through the pages of my own memory. The swing creaked slowly, making that familiar sound that had accompanied me for so many years, and it was there, in that slow back and forth, that I opened my diary for the first time since it all happened. I wrote unhurriedly, like someone who sews an old cloth, stitch by stitch, knowing that each thread needed to breathe before continuing. I spoke of betrayal, not just the one that almost killed my son, but the one that hurts in silence, the one that erodes people's trust over the years. I spoke of faith, which sometimes seems to disappear, but comes back when we no longer expect it. And I talked about the cry that I never gave, because in the end, it was not my cry that saved my son. It was the voice of a child, a small, trembling voice but full of courage. Liam. I wrote his name slowly, as if thanking with his own hand. Sometimes I find myself thinking about how many other women like me are living quietly inside their own homes, women who carry the world on their backs, but who tremble just to imagine that no one will ever see their effort. And I wonder if it was worth it to have stayed silent. I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors. I didn't retaliate with hatred. I just resisted. I just waited for the moment when the truth would find a crack to enter. And she entered through the voice of a 9-year-old boy. When I wrote this in the journal, I felt a tear fall on the page. But it wasn't sadness. It was recognition. A kind of mature peace. One of those that only come after the world almost knocks you down. Joe was sitting near the kitchen door at that moment, in a wheelchair as usual. He no longer speaks. He does not respond, as before. But I noticed that when I mentioned his name out loud, his eyes blinked twice. It was so small, so fast, but I saw it. It was as if he was telling me, "I'm still here, Hilda. Brandon has also been coming every day, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to see if I need something. But I know he comes more for the silence than for the food. He sits next to me, says little, but holds my hand with that firmness that only a son who almost lost his mother can have. And yet, deep in my chest, it is Liam who occupies my thoughts. The courage of that boy, the way he walked through a hospital corridor, challenged adults, faced screams and closed doors, all for love. How can a child carry so much truth in his chest? I close the journal for a moment, look up at the cloudy sky and think, God has seen me, not when I tried to be strong, but when I was weak, not when I obeyed, but when I finally said no. That's it. That is enough. But as it sways slowly, and the wind pulls my gray hair back, a sensation visits me, almost like a warning. The story seems settled, but my heart knows that there is still one last piece, one last movement, one last truth that has not yet been said, and I can feel it is coming. The question is, am I ready to listen? I closed my diary with the phrase that closed not only those pages, but an entire cycle of my life. I was good. I was deceived, but I was not defeated. And it's true. Today, sitting on my swing, with the smell of mint rising from the backyard and the house finally breathing peace, I feel that everything has found its place. Ashley is serving her sentence, far from here, with no more masks. The Thompsons lost what they had built on the basis of lies, and were forced to face their own reflection without adornment. Eric is undergoing treatment, surrounded by doctors who see him as a person, not a guinea pig. And Brandon, oh, my Brandon. He remains firm, taking care of his brother and our family with the silent loyalty he always has. Joe blinks more when I talk to him, and for me, that's enough to know that he feels my relief. And Liam, my little Liam, he spends his afternoons with me, filling the house with laughter and questions. Today he put a cup of tea on my lap, looked at me with that glow of innocence and said, "Grandma, I saved you, right?" And I smiled, put my wrinkled hand over his, and replied, "Actually, my son, it was you who reminded me of who I was. Because at the end of the day, the great lesson I learned is that true love has no size or age. He just needs courage. And when we think we are too weak to fight, sometimes it is the smallest voice that gives us back our strength. Life has taught me that we are not measured by the times we fall, but by the times we get up without losing our dignity. And today, after all, I can say that I got up. Thank you for staying with me so far, for having walked through this heavy but true story. Their company is like a light on the window of an old house. If you want to give me a heartwarming hug, leave a like on this video. And if you want to come back for the next coffee, Sign up. This little house here is also yours. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching. I like to imagine every little face scattered around this big world, sitting with me on the porch, and it activates the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.